This recording will be available at the events site for the Caribbean Migration Consultations, which is caribbeanmigration.org/events. We will, to the extent possible, have written questions for the question and answer period of this webinar. To ask questions of the panelists, you'll be able to use the chat function that's available on your right-hand side of the application, or you can email to cmc@iom.int. Members of the Caribbean Migration Portal can also prolong and deepen this discussion on the discussion forums of caribbeanmigration.org. Should you at any time have any difficulty in hearing or any issues, please also use the chat function or public or direct messages, or you can use the email. As some of you may know, in 2016, the Caribbean Migration Consultations was launched to offer a cooperation framework on migration for the Caribbean region to address issues of common and unique concern. In the first meetings of the CMC, participating states set out priority issues regarding international migration and refugee protection. There was a clear need and desire for more information and the sharing of information and good practices within the region. IOM, in response, carried out a 10-country migration governance needs assessment, which led to 10 country reports and 1 regional report that is also available on the website. The website was also developed by IOM in direct response to the country's desire for a single online platform for engagement. You'll see a link to that report in the chat feature of the webinar in just a moment. As a result of these needs assessment, it was also clear that there was a gap in understanding as well as concerns about the levels of implementation of the pre-movement regimes of OECS and CARICOM and their impact on economies and national and regional security. IOM, with the generous cooperation of CARICOM and the OECS, then undertook this ambitious and innovative study on the 2 free movement regimes, in particular to see the economic and security implications of these agreements and their implementation. What resulted from this study is what we're here to discuss today. If you have not already downloaded this study, you may do so. I will see if I can provide that link to you in just a moment on the right-hand side. One moment. That link is now provided for you in case you need to download this report. Should you have any questions about the Caribbean Migration Consultations, future CMC events, information sharing opportunities, or interest in hosting a CMC event, or looking for capacity building opportunities, we'll be happy to receive your emails at vtarne@iom.int or cmc@iom.int. Now, for our featured webinar today, I would like to present our presenters and panelists. The researchers and the authors of the report, Free Movement of Persons in the Caribbean, Economic and Security Dimensions, Estela Aragón, IOM Research Officer at the Regional Office for North America, Central America, and the Caribbean in San Jose, Costa Rica, and Briana Mawby, IOM Lead Researcher, also in our regional office in San Jose. I'm also pleased to introduce our panelists today. Ms. Wanya Eels, Senior Technical Officer, Caribbean Community. Wanya is joining us from CARICOM in Bridgetown, Barbados. Wanya has over 18 years experience in the area of trade, development, and administrative reform. She holds a doctorandus degree of the Anton de Kom University of Suriname and an MPA in governance from the Institute of Social Studies, The Hague, the Netherlands. She has been employed with the Caribbean Community Secretariat since 2009 and is responsible for, among other things, for the simplification and harmonization of administrative procedures governing the free movement of persons in the CSM. Prior to Ms. Neal's stint at the Secretariat, she served as Suriname's first ever CSME focal point for Suriname and coordinated the implementation of measures that led to Suriname's single market readiness in 2005. Our second panelist, Dr. Clarence Henry, as an officer and regional integration specialist with the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, joining us from Castries, St. Lucia. I'm muting him as we. Okay, so if you guys could make sure that when you join that your microphones are off, I'll try to continue muting them as the moderator, but just watch the microphones to the best of your ability. Thank you so much. Dr. Clarence Henry is a development economist by training. He is a holder of a diploma in teaching, a Bachelor of Science degree in economics and government, Master of Science, and a Doctor of Philosophy in economic development from the University of the West Indies. Dr. Henry previously held the post of Lecturer of Economics at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. His current portfolio at the OECS Commission is focused on the advancement of initiatives to strengthen the free movement of persons regime of the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union. Dr. Henry is of the strong belief that regional integration is a vehicle for social and economic progress among developing states, an argument that he advanced in his PhD thesis. The OECS economic integration efforts, in his view, have delivered benefits to member states, and those benefits will be optimized with a fully implemented economic union. Ms. Eels and Dr. Henry, we are very grateful to you for the cooperation on this study, as well as taking the time out of your busy schedules to participate in this webinar. And before we turn to our panelists, I'm going to turn the floor over to our researchers and authors, Estela Aragón and Briana Mawby, to discuss this new report and its findings. Estela and Briana, congratulations on the publication of this report, and I hope our audience will find it just as interesting and informative as we do. So I'll go ahead and turn this over to them, and hopefully we can see the presentation in just a moment.
Thank you, Brendan. Good morning, everybody. We are having some connection issues. So I'll ask you to bear with me and give me a couple of minutes to reconnect the presentation.
Hello? Hello? I'm not hearing anything. This is Fitzgerald Yaw.
Yes, we'll be with you in just a moment. We're just getting connected. We're getting the presentation connected.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, thanks. Okay, all right.
Seems like they were.
Open. Good. Yeah. Okay, just if you could hold just one moment, I'm going to see if I can share it from my side. Thank you very much for your patience. There's always a little bit of technological issues.
Siapa kadang semua kemat. Kemudian
Okay, seems like we were able to fix our connection problems. Again, I apologize for the delay.
ja, bij in het grote toilet. Ik ga daar halen. Kleine flessen.
I ask you please to turn off your mics. Seems like there's a lot of noise in the background. Thank you. All right, so as my colleague Brendan already mentioned, this study pretends to fill a knowledge gap that was identified through the migration governance needs assessment that we conducted in 10 island states of the Commonwealth Caribbean. One of the needs that was expressed to us during this study was the need to have a better understanding on the impact that free movement regimes were having in the region. The main objectives of this study were to improve the understanding of complex dynamics surrounding free mobility of persons in the Caribbean, as well as to foster the maximization of the potential of free movement as a development tool. The end result of this study is one regional report and 6 country briefs, which in a very graphic manner show how free movement of people looks like in each of these countries. We're only able to conduct fieldwork in 6 countries. Therefore, we only have, unfortunately, 6 country briefs. And then, as I already said, we have one regional report which explains how free movement works in each of the 2 regimes that currently are operational in the region, as well as the economic and security dimensions and impact that both regimes have had in the region. As for the methodology, I'm not going to speak in detail about this. If you have any questions regarding the methodology, perhaps we can address that over the Q&A section. So very briefly, I'll just mention that the first step of the process was to conduct a desk review, meaning reviewing any documentation and literature that exists regarding the regime of the CSME and the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union. After that, we mapped all stakeholders that are relevant for the topic of study. We conducted diagnostic interviews as well as face-to-face interviews and focus groups. And after that, we did an analysis through a coding system and the validation of the preliminary findings. So the free movement in the Caribbean. Caribbean countries experience unique migration flows related to their particular geographic and economic, social, and security situations. Migration has played an important role in the history of the region, in its development and in its regional integration. There is 2 regional organizations that have developed regimes to facilitate free movement of persons within the Caribbean. That is the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. Both of these organizations have developed free movement regimes and explicitly link with free movement to development. However, free movement of persons operates differently in these 2 organizations. As for the OECS, it was established in 1981 in Investors and Kitts and Nevis. It is comprised of 7 protocol member states and 4 associate members. The OECS protocol member states are also members of CARICOM, as well as distinct group within CARICOM. The revised Treaty of Buster was established the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union in 2010, and within the Economic Union, all OECS nationals may move among the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union, and countries and people from member states are able to travel for work or reside in other member states. Free movement of persons has been fully realized within certain countries of the OECS, and as I already said, they can move freely for different purposes. As for CARICOM, it is made up of 15 member states and 5 associate members. It was founded in 1973 with the Treaty of Chaguaramas, and the CARICOM Single Market and Economy was created. We'll continue with the presentation. Within the CSME, I was saying certain groups of people, including skilled national service providers and individuals establishing businesses, may stay indefinitely, provided they meet the requirements. We will briefly talk about mobility trends of Caribbean nationals. I would just like to double check if perhaps you can write in the chat if you're able to hear me. Wonderful, thank you. We're now moving forward to speak about some of the main findings of this study. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the different mobility trends of CARICOM nationals. Available data sets are not complete, unfortunately, but figures on facilitation of travel within CARICOM indicate that from inception through 2017, the movement of over 2 million people was facilitated in the region. In 2017, Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana were the main sending countries, while Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago were the countries receiving the most Caribbean nationals. It is important to mention that this data refers to facilitation of traveling or facilitation of travelers, which is not necessarily equivalent to statistics on migration. One of the findings as well was that although interregional movement is increasing, extra-regional migration remains much more significant in terms of numbers, as well as the impact that extra-regional migration is having in both the economy and the labor market is much, much significant. Under specific circumstances, member states have the right to deny the entry of CARICOM nationals. The number of annual denials of entry to CARICOM nationals has declined in the last 5 years. The latest figures indicate a decrease from 1,750 in 2016 to 1,244 in 2017. This trend can be due to several reasons. One of them include a greater cooperation between member states, and another one could be that the CSME has made efforts towards better articulating the criteria for denial of entry. One of the denials of entry for 2017, 81% were processed by Trinidad and Tobago, and of those CARICOM nationals who were denied entry, 41% were from Guyana, and 21% were from Jamaica.
Hi everyone, my name is Briana Mawby, the other researcher on this report, and I'll be taking over from Estela here. Thank you for the great beginning to the presentation. I hope you all can continue to hear us. Within the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union, free movement of all citizens for the protocol member states is allowed, including the free mobility of labor. Within the CSME, free movement for economic purposes is centered around the movement of skilled nationals, the right of establishment, and the provision of services. Those Caribbean citizens that do not fill these criteria for free movement may still apply for a work permit in accordance with national laws. The establishment of skill certificates for skilled nationals aimed at reducing or eliminating the use of work permits for skilled workers. However, we found that long-term work permits are still utilized more often by CARICOM and skill certificates, with the exceptions of Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and Belize. It's important to note that this may be attributable to other factors, such as changes in national policy regarding issuance of work permits or financial investment required from employers. In 2017, 1,165 skill certificates were issued to CARICOM nationals, and over 60% of those certificates were issued in Guyana, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. The data show a trend of slow growth in the issuance of skill certificates, with an increase of 4.7% from 2016 to 2017. We found that skill certificates issued are heavily concentrated in the category of university graduates, with 71%, followed by holders of associate degrees with 11% and artisans with 5%. Our report provides an overview of the successes and challenges regarding free movement regimes in both of these institutions. Both CARICOM and OECS member states have made significant progress advancing regional integration and expanding the avenues that allow people to move throughout the region. This coordination is facilitating greater opportunity to travel, seek employment, and establish businesses. Both institutions have made progress towards promoting the rights of their nationals, especially ensuring the portability of social benefits, including access to health care and education services for themselves and for their family members. Common regional institutions, particularly within the OECS, were often cited as a source for regional cooperation and a basis for integration. Those common institutions include the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the Supreme Court, the Civil Aviation Authority, and the Currency Union. Within CARICOM, the experience of creating a single domestic space during the 2007 Cricket World Cup was also cited as an important foundation for regional cooperation. However, challenges remain, particularly in supporting countries to implement free movement regimes equally and to harmonize the necessary procedures to ensure that free mobility happens in a safe and orderly manner, benefiting both member states and people traveling. Implementation of Social Security agreements and the harmonization of entry and exit procedures remains uneven, and many stakeholders cited the lack of public awareness about the rights and responsibilities of CARICOM and OECS nationals. We found that the improved development of indicators and better collection of data would be critical to conducting deeper and more systematic analysis of trends in the region. This would also allow for the creation of a foundation supporting evidence-based, responsive, and effective national and regional migration policies.
Hi.
We hope that you'll take a look at the report. It goes into these findings on impact in much more detail, but I'll summarize them here for you. As discussed previously by Estela, the number of intra-regional migrants and of people using skill certificates continues to increase each year. However, these figures are small when compared to the number of persons moving to countries outside the region, particularly to the United States and Canada. Similarly, the economic impact of intra-regional mobility remains less significant than the impact of extra-regional remittances and foreign direct investment. Many stakeholders emphasize key security concerns, including the limited ability to track who is traveling within the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union or who is using the 6-month definite stay within the CSME, the challenges of vetting individuals applying for citizenship by investment programs, and links to terrorist networks in the region. We're grateful that you joined us today, and we hope that you could hear us. We hope that you will take time to read the full report if you're interested in more detail on these findings. The study provides an analysis of migration trends in the region through the free movement regimes that facilitate movement, and describes how these provisions are shaping the way that CARICOM and OECS nationals move across the region. Although there are still challenges to overcome, free movement of persons has the potential to serve as a tool for both national and regional development when managed in an orderly, safe, and regular manner. Thank you so much for taking time to listen.
Great, thank you so much. Estela and Briana, thank you for this overview of the report. I'm sure we're going to have some questions about it. And before we move to questions, I'm going to give the floor to our panelists for short presentations. The panelists were asked to address 3 questions regarding the report and free movement. Estela and Briana, if you can go to the next slide. So the questions were, which findings from the report did you find most interesting? Based on the report, which challenge or concern would you highlight? And then how might this report be utilized by your respective agency? As a reminder, if you have questions, you may ask them in the chat feature and we will compile them. There will be a time where we open up for questions after these presentations, just in case you want to hold your question as it may be answered in the following presentations. So we'll begin with Ms. Wanya Eels from CARICOM. We'll welcome you to provide your presentation. Feel free to share your screen if you're able to do so.
All right. Good morning, colleagues. My apologies, I'm a little bit under the weather, so from time to time I may have a little sneeze fit. But I thought it was important to join this webinar because of the work that has been put into it. We had been partnering with IOM since early last year, providing information to them, and we were also part of the validation process to this report. Where do I share my PowerPoint? I sent it to Briana this morning. Hello?
Briana, are you able to share the presentation for Ms. Eels? Ms. Eels, do you see a little screen at the top of your, you see a kind of a video camera and then a microphone and then a screen? No?
Yeah, I see the screen. Yep.
Okay, click that share screen.
Yep.
And then you should be able to open your presentation there.
Okay. Is it visible? Is the presentation up?
It might be loading, just one moment. Just showing black for right now. One moment. Thank you for your patience, everyone. All right, let me see. I have your presentation here. Let me see if I can do this for you. One moment.
Mm-hmm.
Brendan?
Yes.
Seems like we have a more stable connection. Perhaps I can
Okay.
put up the presentation if that's okay.
That would be great.
Right, but I can start to speak to my short presentation while we're waiting for it to load. I have it up on my own screen. So as Brandon indicated, we were asked to respond to 3 questions. And the questions were, which findings from the report did you find most interesting? Based on this report, which challenges and concerns would you wish to highlight? And 3, how might this report be utilized by the CARICOM in terms of how the community is currently addressing those challenges? So I've went a little further in terms of providing that information. In terms of the findings, my apologies. In terms of the findings that we thought were interesting, at the beginning of the report, there is this comparison provided of free movement regimes around the world. And a couple of things stand out from that comparison. One is that there's only one instance of free movement that is implemented, and which is the Schengen area. And even in that particular case of the EU, we would have noticed that not all EU member states would have participated in that free movement regime. Only the Schengen countries would have participated. We also note from the listing provided in that section of the report that the abolition of visa also seems to be problematic for some immigration areas. We also know that in cases where the integration organizations would have agreed to the total free movement, that implementation is lagging behind. And interestingly, I noted in some of the arrangements that specifically included is the right to residency, 1, as well as the right to a work permit for 2 years, after which the applicant could apply for residency. And I thought that was very interesting, because that is one of the things that we're currently working on right now in terms of ensuring that we could provide enough security to community nationals that when they have received indefinite stay in a receiving member state, that it is basically the same as residency. But we didn't use that particular term in terms of providing the rights. In terms of a second thing that I thought was interesting from the report, and I'm not sure if you're able to share already. Are you sharing the PowerPoint?
Yes, it's being shared.
Yes,
Okay, so I'm now on slide number 4 right now. The next slide is basically, I thought it was interesting what the numbers tell us in terms of this report. We would have noticed, and I think in the introductory presentation, reference was made in terms of some of the numbers that we would have seen coming out of this study. But I thought it was just important to highlight these 4 that are now on the screen. We would have noticed that during World Cup cricket in 2007, in a few weeks/months, about 45,000 persons would have entered the region on a single entry visa. We also note that for the skills certificates, that less than 20,000 skills certificates were issued for a period close to 25 years, because we would have started the skills regime in the 1990s, mid-1990s. So it's almost 25 years that we have been issuing skills certificates. And in that period of time, less than 20,000 skills certificates were issued. We also know the decline in persons being denied entry under the facilitation of travel. This is interesting to note. We would have done some work in terms of ensuring that, one, there is increased awareness on the side of the border officials. There has been extensive training provided to them, but it also efforts that nationals are more aware about their rights. So when they enter into another member state, that they know exactly what their rights are. And of course, work remains outstanding. There's much more to be done. But we wish to think that that is attributed to the decline in numbers that we noticed here. We also know the numbers in 2017, that about 1,165 skill certificates were issued, but there were only 242 skill certificates verified that year. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean that in the same year when a skill certificate is issued, it will be verified in another member state. But it just presents us with an idea that even though there are 20,000 skill certificates issued for the last 25 years, a number of persons may have never used the skill certificate, so they may have never moved to another member state to use their skill certificate. And also in the number of 20,000 skill certificates, there is some amount of double, and maybe in some instances triple counting, because there was a particular point in time that some member states were issuing a second skill certificate at the point of verification. Currently, there's only one member state still doing that, that is Trinidad and Tobago. And we're aware about CARICOM nationals that hold 2 and in some instances 3 skill certificates. So in the 20,000 skill certificates, we have persons who have more than 1 skill certificate. And we also note, and I think reference was made to that number as well, the long and short-term work permits in that same year in 2017. And both numbers are more than the skill certificates issued in that particular year. The next slide. Also interesting was the impact assessment that was presented somewhere later in the report. And we saw some of the conclusions in that impact assessment. The impact remains small compared to migratory movement. We also know that there is more movement extra-regionally, so CARICOM nationals are moving more outside of CARICOM than moving intra-regionally within the CARICOM. We also see that the main flow of FDIs is from countries outside of the region, the USA and Netherlands are the top 2 countries. And we also know that the movement of all community nationals is mainly to OECD countries outside of the region. The next slide. In terms of the challenges that have been identified in the report, the challenges and concerns, I would have listed and highlighted the most important ones. What I would have done also in this part of the presentation is provide an update in terms of what the community is currently doing to provide a redress to these challenges. Now, also to indicate that most of these challenges are known to the community, the CARICOM Secretariat, the administrators in the member states, and as a consequence of that identification process, work has begun to redress those. Focus and mention was made of the lack of harmonization in relation to the free movement regimes, and specifically in relation to that, there is a specific conference mandate that calls for the simplification and the harmonization of the administrative practices and procedures for the free movement, and this work is ongoing. The report also mentions the use of discretionary practices and powers by border officials. And one of the things that the community has done is to provide for procedures that deal with what needs to be done when a person is denied entry in another member state, and that is set out. And the community agreed to that procedure, and there's also complaints mechanism in place, which nationals can use if they're not able to access their rights. The next slide speaks to one of the challenges that was also identified, which is the lack of data and information. I was quite happy and excited about this report because data tells its own story. And we're only able to really speak to what impact the CSME is having, the movement is having, if we're able to look at data. And this report has done some of that and has provided some of the analysis that is possible, but only when you have the data. So a couple of things that the community has done in order to be able to not collect data. Hello? This is slide number 7, which speaks to the lack of data, which had been identified as one of the challenges. So the community, in an attempt to address this particular issue, would have built a number of systems that are not only established to collect the data, but also to provide an analysis of the data. And one of the more important ones is the labor market information system that has been built under the 10th EDF, the 10th European Development Fund program. And the Secretariat is now working with member states to ensure that the data on the indicators is provided to the Secretariat, and so that the information can be uploaded on the CARICOM labor market information system. And some of the other systems that we would have worked on for the last 5 years is the online registry for companies, the CSME application processing system, which has been built in 2014, 2015, but only one member state is using it currently. It is a system that provides for the online application of a skilled certificate. So, which would basically makes the manual application, would take over the manual application for a skilled certificate. There's also a government procurement portal that has been established. 2 systems are being worked out right now. One is the monitoring and evaluation system on the CSME, for which indicators have been identified, and work is also ongoing in the area of the result-based management system, which is also to provide us with important data in terms of the community, the member states, and as well as the institutions. The next slide speaks to the capacity constraints that we are facing as a community. There has been a specific regime established for the LDCs, the less developed countries, in Chapter 7 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. The CARICOM Development Fund is providing specific assistance to address the issues that have been identified by the LDCs, but also the sectors that have been identified as disadvantaged. And we also note that a number of donors are providing support to the community to address some of the issues that we have identified. And more specifically, support has been provided by the European Development Fund under the 11th EDF, under which program we will be doing some work in relation to the free movement. How might this report be utilized by the CARICOM Secretariat? It is useful for us to receive this report as a confirmation of the issues and the weaknesses in the system that we have identified. And so the work that we have started a few years back in terms of the harmonization and the simplification of procedures, the need to improve data collection and analysis, but also the need to build capacity to better enable the monitoring of the movement is some of the things that we will continue to do as a community. One of the things that perhaps could be a follow-up of this report could perhaps be a study where the focus would be on the experiences of the users of the system. In large measure, this study focused on the government side of things. There is a focus on the analysis of the data, but it is useful, and more we have been including our stakeholders in the discussions in terms of what their experiences are in terms of the regime, what is happening, what are the issues that they are experiencing as they are moving in the region. This slide here, colleagues, is just basically to give you an idea of some of the other issues that the community is struggling with and for which we have been developing some specific interventions. We continue to work on the further implementation of the built-in agenda in the Contingent Rights Protocol. The Contingent Rights Protocol was adopted in 2018 by the conference, and all member states participating in the CSMA would have signed the protocol, and the focus is now on ensuring that it is implemented in the member states. There's a specific article in the Contingent Rights Protocol, which is the built-in agenda of the protocol, and we continue to work on issues that have been identified in the built-in agenda in terms of coming to consensus, and then the next step would be to agree on the way forward and then to implement the measures at the national level. Also very important is the St. Anne's Declaration, which was adopted in late 2018 by our conference, that basically called for the free movement of all for those member states that are willing to move so. And a deadline of 2021 had been identified in the declaration. We continue to also work with member states to strengthen the consultative mechanism, both at the national and at the regional level. There is this need for those mechanisms to, one, be put in place, and where those are in place, to strengthen those, and clearly identified as stakeholders in those mechanisms are labor, private sector, and civil society. We also continue to focus on the training of border officials. This year into next year, we will be executing a specific intervention for border officials where they could be part of exchange programs to basically travel into a next jurisdiction and to have an idea and appreciation of how those colleagues are implementing the regimes. We continue to focus on public education, both nationally and regionally. There's specific programs for this year under the EDF that have been identified. And lastly, and I think this is important, based on the numbers that we have seen in this report, the number of 20,000 persons that have applied for a skills certificate, not necessarily used the skills certificate, against the population in the community, we may need to start thinking of whether this is the best suitable arrangement in place to allow for the movement of persons to happen. Obviously, even though this report focuses in great detail on the movement of skilled nationals, there are also two other regimes that are very important, and we know that nationals are moving under those regimes, which are the regimes for services and the right of establishment. Unfortunately, member states are not in a position to provide data on the movement. Hello? Hello? I think somebody has his mic open. Yeah, let me just wrap up. So I think, this report confirms, and we have started to have some conversations as part of the mandate from conference to simplify and harmonize the procedures, to look at an easier way to facilitate the movement of these categories of persons that have the right to move. And then last slide, in terms of the takeaways of this report, the movement under the skills regime is not taking place in large numbers. Data on services and establishments should be collected to complete a picture on who and what is moving under the CARICOM single market and economy. The processes are not harmonized and they're tedious, and there's a lack of compliance across the board in the member states. None of the member states have implemented all of the 12 categories that are allowed to move under the skills regime, and only 3 member states have implemented or included in their legislation the first 10 categories. There is some experience that the region has with a single domestic space, being it, of course, that not all of the member states would have been part of this single domestic space during World Cup cricket in 2007. And lastly, the impact on the free movement in the CSM is relatively small, especially if we compare it to other movements, especially the movement under the work permit regime, as well as the movement of our own nationals moving to other OECD countries. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Ms. Eels, thank you so much for providing your perspective on this report and on free movement, particularly within the CSME. We really appreciate that. We're going to move on to our next panelist, but before I do so, I just want to note if you can just make sure that your microphones remain off. In addition, my colleague Arena Ya and I are sending once in a while direct messages to you, so you may want to check your chat feature. We just want to verify your name and your affiliation so that we can track the participants for our records. So we really do appreciate if you could reply to those direct messages and just quickly provide your name and affiliation if you wish. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn over the microphone. Clarence, I believe I need to unmute you, so if you give me just a moment, I will do that. And once again, Ms. Eels, thank you so much, and we look forward to questions as well after the following presentation. One moment.
You're welcome.
Clarence, go ahead and see if you can unmute your microphone and join.
Okay.
Okay,
Brendan, are you hearing me? Oh, you heard me. Okay, colleagues, good morning to you all. My presentation, it in many ways mirrors the presentation that Wanya just made in terms of some of the issues that I would highlight. But I want to start by first thanking IOM for allowing the OECS to be part of this process. I think any assessment of our regimes, both the OECS, Economic Union, and the CARICOM Single Market Economy, is always welcome, because at the end of the day, we want to determine and get a good sense of how those regimes are impacting the lives of the persons and the entities that they're seeking to serve. So, Brendan, without further ado, I would move to slide 1. I realize I don't have any control, so my assumption is you guys move. Okay, great. So, just before I go into the general sense of what I believe was the most critical finding in the study, I just want to take us back through memory lane in terms of the effort that has been ongoing at the OECS region towards the formalization and certainly operationalization of an economic union. And of course, our process would have started during the colonial period. So you have the West Indies Association of States, WISA, in 1967, which certainly was one of those entities in the post-West Indies Federation demise that was seen to be critical to bring the little eight, well, in that case, less Barbados, together with an effort to address administrative matters. And from that, you had the colonial entities such as the court being established and some sort of monetary arrangement being established. So we started with the WISA, and then with the independence experience of OECS countries, we saw the Treaty of Bastia being signed, formally establishing the Eastern Caribbean, the OECS Eastern Caribbean states, the Organization Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS, in 1981. Now, of course, that process did not stop there as we proceed with advancing the economic interests of the countries that form that organization, and you saw in 1983 an advancement towards a monetary union with the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. Now, the most significant part of that journey is what we're talking about today, and that is the effort in 2010 to set up, via the revised Treaty of Bastia, an economic union, which we refer to as the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union, or if you like, the OECS Economic Union. And so the large measure, the whole discussion on free mobility and the benefit of free movement for not just people, but for capital and for goods and for establishment really evolves around what we are trying to do since the revised Treaty of Bastia was signed. So we can move to the next slide, if you may. So what the report was critical in doing a very good job in highlighting the key benefits and accomplishments that we've seen at the OECS level, particularly in relation to movement of persons. And so you have the issue of the hassle-free travel and the use of ID cards issued by governments to allow for citizens within the OECS protocol member states to travel from one member state to the next. The indefinite stay provision, the provisions to support workers, such as the non-requirement of work permits that was in fact legislated in the national parliaments of the protocol member states to give effect to that reality, and the contingent rights provision that extends the benefits of free movement to not just the principal beneficiary or the citizen of the OECS protocol member state, but to his or her family, and certainly the spouse and dependents, who in many cases may in fact not be citizens of any of the protocol member states. And of course, the report highlights some key challenges, and I recognize Wanya spent discussing those issues as it pertains to CARICOM, some of which are in fact quite similar to the realities of the OECS, and I would speak to a few of those challenges in a future slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. Now the and I say the when you get a surprise, not really a surprise, but a confirmation via a report. You may have known it already, But the most surprising finding for me, and Wanya would have raised that matter as well. And while Wanya was presenting, I was saying, like, we've really done a similar analysis of this report. You know, a lot of the times, persons bit up on the efforts at the OECS level or even the CARICOM level and say that we're not doing enough or we're not pushing the integration process as fast as enough, and we're not apparently committed to advancing regional integration efforts. But when you put, for instance, the OECS process against numerous other regional integration arrangements, what is recognized is that we have, as far as free movement of persons, for instance, is concerned, we have got very, very far. And perhaps one may want to consider the OECS free movement regime to be an example to follow for many other regional organizations. So many of the regional entities this report would have highlighted experience challenges in implementing efforts to implement, but many of the regimes not fully implemented. ASEAN, for instance, requiring special arrangements beyond the elimination of visa requirements and so forth to facilitate movement. Some arrangements are primarily concerned with facilitating travel, whereas the OECS arrangement, and certainly CARICOM as well, by the CSME, move beyond that. So OECS, we talk about complete movement of citizens. Doesn't matter what your skills are, skills or no skills. It doesn't matter whether, in fact, you know, you are interested in moving or not. It's a right that is granted, and it's your option to utilize the right when you so desire. So complete movement for all citizens, and ultimately upon arrival, indefinite stay. So there's no need for an administrative process in order to claim the right to stay in another protocol member state for as long as you wish. The right is granted by virtue of the fact that your country has agreed to formalize an economic union arrangement and to implement Article 12 of the protocol, which speaks to the free movement of persons. And so I thought that was the OECS definitely has or is miles ahead where it pertains to the advancement of movement of persons. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you very much. So while we have the there's always the recognition that the does not mean that we're where we want to be. That we've certainly have advanced our integration process. We miles ahead in many respects. But while the report been able to explore further, and that's an area of future research, some of the ongoing efforts within the OECS and even CARICOM as well to optimize the benefits of free movement and to ensure that all elements of those regimes are implemented. So with the OECS, we are doing quite a bit in terms of enhancing that regime by strengthening border management and border management systems and procedures, areas where there exists great possibility for collaboration with CARICOM CSME unit. We're talking about ensuring that your benefit as a citizen moving across the protocol member states, and your attempt to take advantage of an integrated labor market system within the economic union space is met through ensuring we have social security portability, particularly where short-term benefits are concerned. We don't have that currently. There are benefits in terms of long-term Social Security portability because of the CARICOM arrangement, the CARICOM agreement on Social Security, but the short-term aspect, short-term Social Security benefits are still left to be resolved, and we are currently working in addressing that. And you also have the need to advance what we want to refer to as an OECS identity, or some concrete deliverable that identifies a citizen of Dominica or a citizen of St. Lucia or Antigua and Barbuda or Montserrat to be not just connected with CARICOM. As you see, we have the CARICOM passports, but also connected with the OECS. And we are currently doing work to be funded under the 11th EDF, European Development Fund, towards the implementation of an OECS-wide ID, which would be used for travel and for conducting business, and to certainly take advantage of contingent rights benefits as you move with your family. And in addition to that, we are doing further work on enhancing the movement of goods through effort towards the implementation of a free circulation of goods regime. Of course, there are the other regimes, the free movement of capital, certainly spearheaded in terms of its implementation by the Monetary Union, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank in that case. Free movement of services, some aspect of that would have already been accomplished by virtue of persons being able to move freely and providing their services, but where it pertains to particular service providers, there are efforts towards harmonizing the way professional service providers move across the economic union space. So we are in fact pushing ahead with ongoing efforts to strengthen, to optimize the benefits that the beneficiary of our economic union, the citizens and the businesses that operate within the economic union space are able to obtain. Next slide, please. Next slide. So there are some takeaways from the report. There are some critical takeaways from the report. And I highlight in red what are most critical, and perhaps especially the third point, an area for more advanced research. And I may well choose to speak to the third area first. Wanya made reference to the need for perhaps a study that focuses primarily on persons who are expected to benefit from those economic arrangements. I really appreciate how they've obtained benefits, because many times just looking at the economic indicators may not give you a sense of how this family or that family benefit from free movement, or how this industry is benefiting. Of course, certain economic indicators would tell you whether there are benefits or not, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there exists zero benefits. And so we need to look at a study that places emphasis on the socio-economic impact of integration. And certainly for us at the OECS, this is one of the areas we want to see done as a future area of study. The report does in fact speak to economic considerations and have the reality where foreign investment are concerned. Brazil is attachment to extra-regional focus, particularly with the US and the EU arrangement. So the fact is, we know that is the reality, but it doesn't necessarily say that the arrangements that we have are not bringing certain key economic benefits to the persons whom we are trying to serve. The father and the mother in a household, and the child in the household, the small businessman who's trying to advance of the wider market created by the OECS Economic Union, and if you want to extend by the CSME, we need to be able to capture that reality in a report. And so it's an area of future study. For us at the OECS Commission, we also recognize that if we are to do what I just spoke about, to identify and to pinpoint how we are doing in implementing the OECS Economic Union, there is need for focus on monitoring of the free movement regimes. And so currently we're working on the development of a framework that will deal with monitoring and evaluation. But a central aspect of that is the whole issue of data. How do we capture such data? And consequently, how do we create a mechanism that allows for proper reporting of where we are at with the implementation of the OECS Economic Union? Another aspect, of course, would be the issue of implementation capacity of member states. The member states are the key implementers of the regimes. They are the ones to ensure that where there require legislative changes, those are done. Where they require administrative changes, those are done. At the end of the day, we must ensure that the member states possess the capacity to implement the regime in a manner that allows for the kinds of benefits that were promised by inception. And of course, the fourth point I have here speaks to strengthening public awareness efforts. At the end of the day, the beneficiaries of the OECS Economic Union, for instance, must appreciate that they have rights and responsibilities. And we have recognized that there's increasing need to enhance public awareness efforts, to strengthen those efforts, so that those individuals know those benefits, they can act on those benefits. We want to get to a point where the average citizen of OECS protocol member state moving throughout the economic union know when they present their passport or present their ID to the immigration official at a border crossing within the economic union, that the expectation is the granting of an indefinite stay stamp. And it should not be a case where persons are going back after hearing about indefinite stay stamp. They're going back to have a look at the passport to see, did I get a stamp the last time I traveled in Grenada, or I traveled to Antigua and Barbuda? Is the expectation you have, just as I live in CARICOM, you expect when you travel, the immediate 6 months definite stay should be granted, and one expect that is given. The same is the expectation when our citizens travel. So strengthening public awareness is a critical aspect of it, and we certainly put in efforts to advance this. So I think these 4 areas for me are areas that really speak to where the focus ought to be, so that we get an appreciation of current efforts what are the benefits, current benefits, who getting the benefits, and person's perception and understanding of what those benefits are. So I think the last one is the last slide. If you move right. So essentially, colleagues, this is my two cents on the report. I think it is a very good report. I like Brendan encourage everyone to take the opportunity to read the report and perhaps to provide their comments. Our end at the OECS Commission, we would truly like to see some further research specifically on the matters of the socioeconomic benefits with a focus on targeting the expected beneficiaries of the economic arrangements. With that said,
Great, absolutely. Thank you for providing your and OECS's perspective on this report. Given this mountain of information we've just received from our 4 presenters, we are happy that so many people from around the region and hopefully the world are listening. We'd like to open up the floor for comments and questions. As we said, we would like to see if your questions can be provided in the chat feature, so feel free to drop it there. You can either do a direct message to me or just do a public comment or question.
The times and asking for reservations. But 8 o'clock usually.
And just make sure that we have microphones off.
In New Orleans, I could remember going to breakfast. They got some special breakfast. There's different things, but this was breakfast at midnight at the casinos.
All right. Okay, so let's see if there's any questions from anyone. In the meantime, we do have a comment from Ms. Annette Fleischer from GIZ. She was interested in maybe a brief comment. We'll take a couple comments and then we can open it up for the panelists and speakers. She was interested to learn more about how sudden onset events such as hurricanes affect the free movement regimes, and I think it's kind of the relationship or how free movement regimes work in response to hurricanes. And then we also have a question from Ms. Alma Francis. She says, I understand that these regimes are an important development tool. Have you developed any sense of whether the regimes have been effective in advancing development of Caribbean islands? So I think let's take those two first. Thank you very much to both. And there's just one more question. Will the presentations from OECS and CARICOM be shared with us? I'll just ask for the permission of Ms. Eels and Dr. Henry if we can do that, and we'll be happy to send those out. So either the authors or the panelists would like to respond to either of those.
Quickly, this is Wanya, CARICOM Secretariat. Let me just respond to the one on the situations like hurricanes, but just also to indicate that we have no difficulty with the IOM sharing the presentation. As a matter of fact, we were going to propose that that be done. Just to speak to the issue of what happens in terms of free movement after a disaster happens, there's no regional policy in place that would quote unquote waive existing restrictions. What member states had done is to basically use national policies to allow other nationals from member states who would have experienced hurricanes to come to their jurisdiction, basically waiving some of the requirements that were prior in place. It is perhaps something that could be discussed at a regional level, but at this point in time, there's no regional policy in place, but member states have been responding in terms of facilitating the movement of those persons who would have suffered because of the aftermath of a particular hurricane. Thank you.
Hi, this is Briana Mawby. We heard a lot in our research about free movement regimes facilitating and saving lives, particularly after Hurricane Maria in 2017. particularly as people needed to leave Dominica to find safety or to allow people to enter Dominica to support the reconstruction and rebuilding process. We also know that in Antigua and Barbuda, the evacuation of Barbuda and also the free movement regimes allowed people to move out of the country to find safety until they could return home and rebuild as needed. This is one of the key points made to us across many interviews and many stakeholders, that this was a key success of free movement, particularly within the OECS, that people could come and go and find safety for themselves and their families, and that it could also support rebuilding economically.
Now, I would like to perhaps make reference.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Brendan?
Go ahead, Clarence.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. I just wanted to add from what Briana was saying, as it pertains to the response to natural disasters. One of the things that we keep emphasizing where the OECS Economic Union Arrangement is concerned is that the framework is robust in that while the framework would not have been built for necessarily enhancing our capacity to deal with natural disasters, although we have work on common environmental policy matters which are cross-cutting for the Economic Union, the fact that you have a regime that allows persons to move so freely and to stay for as long as they want, indefinitely, and to begin working without the requirement for work permit is a framework that is quite effective in responding to a natural disaster. And so when Maria devastated the economy for Dominica in 2017, you had that in full play, both in terms of Dominicans moving across to Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and Grenadines, neighboring member states of the OECS, but also in terms of the quick response of other OECS nationals from St. Lucia, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Vincent and Grenadines, going across to Dominica and from day one being able to work legally without necessarily having to waiver any particular legal requirements for them to do so, because of the fact that the Economic Union already provided for it. So I think it is a point to be highlighted. Briana did, but I was just adding a little bit to that part of the thing. I think it's something that we're very proud of, and I certainly recall the head of immigration at some point in one of our regional forums also highlighting that as certainly an element of success for the OECS. Thank you, Brendan.
Thanks to you, Clarence.
Estela, did you have anything to add?
Yes, so I would like to refer to the second question that has to do with whether we were able to see the regimes functioning as a development tool. So in the study, we are not addressing development as a whole, as it is a very broad concept. What we're focusing on more specifically is on economic development and impact on labor market that are certainly related to development, but is not development per se. So I would like just to clarify that before I move on to explaining a little bit some of the findings in this regard. So I'm going to speak directly in regards to economic impact and economic development. What we were able to see, as we have already mentioned previously, is that the economic impact, same as the impact in the labor market that free movement has had in the region, is small when compared to other types of movements, such as Wanya also mentioned. So just to give you an example, intra-regional remittances represent only 2.3% of overall remittances that are received in the region. So this is less than 3%. Another fact that I could mention is that over half of the total of intra-regional remittances that are being sent from the Bahamas, that are being sent intra-regionally, are being sent from the Bahamas, which does not take part of any of the free mobility agreements. So this, along with another proxy indicator, that is the direct foreign investment, that most of them are being sent from the United States or countries outside of the region as well, gives us an indication of the smaller economic impact that intra-regional movement is having when compared to movements outside of the region. This may also perhaps mentioning briefly the impact on the labor market and on migration as a whole. We're seeing that intra-regional movements are very low when compared to extra-regional movements. And some possible explanations that we give in the report is that first, people who want to move on a permanent or semi-permanent basis do not necessarily travel utilizing some of the free movement provisions, or that when they have to make the decision to move, they still prefer to move outside of the region. So that is one explanation. Another explanation is that, well, first of all, we have very little data that directly measures or sizes the economic impact and the impact on the labor market. So we can only obtain information through proxy indicators. This is other information and other data that somehow we can link to free movement, but we do not have direct indicators measuring this. So that can be another explanation. Another explanation might be that people move through other provisions, such as, for example, within the CSME, the 6-month stay, and they engage in the labor market or in economic activities in the informal sector, meaning that these type of activities happening informally are very difficult to track and very difficult to measure. So there might be a lot happening, however, it's really difficult to assess. So I apologize if I can't give a more direct answer, but at least those are the findings we're able to get through our research.
Brandon, Wanya is here. Can I just add, though, further to my intervention in terms of the non-existence of aftermath of a hurricane? SEDIMA, which is the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, which is a regional institution, has been leading and developing a policy. So the expectation is that in the next few months, a policy will be tabled. Conference will have to look at it and decide on the way forward. So work has already started, and it is being led by the SEDIMA.
Great, thank you so much for that clarification. We did get started a couple minutes late, so we're going to take just maybe a couple more questions with some brief answers. I'm going to take the first ones that came up here, and I think they're related. Let's see, it's from Dr. Dietrich Jones, asking if Estela Briana could elaborate on security concerns and whether there are any indication that these are impacting on implementation of the CSME regime. And a second one that does have to do with security is from Jasmina Godawan from ODPM in Trinidad. Are we giving considerations to the COVID-19, that's the coronavirus, in contingency planning? So I know that that's a health security issue, right, that she's bringing up, and whether or not that has any effect on contingency plannings, and then whether or not security issues are having any impact on the implementation of the CSME regime. It can be a little bit complicated, but maybe get a couple comments on free movement and security regarding these.
Hi, this is Briana Mawby. I'll jump in on the security impact question. What we heard most often were concerns among stakeholders in the region about intelligence sharing and the ability to vet people who are moving. This was particularly significant for people moving within the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union, because movement is completely free. So in terms of ensuring that people are entering regularly and safely is important. And then additionally, that same concern for people entering using the 6-month definite stay within the CSME, how to properly vet those people coming while still ensuring that movement is free and that people are free to move as they desire. I think balancing those two things was a big concern that we heard in interviews. Additionally, we heard concerns about vetting more broadly for folks moving through citizens by investment programming, so making sure that stakeholders and border officials are using both regional and international watch lists and really coordinating closely on updating information on people and whether they are a threat or whether they're considered safe as they enter borders. Generally speaking, that relates to the concerns about harmonization and coordination within the region, making sure that different stakeholders within the security and border management sectors are speaking to each other and harmonizing their processes as much as possible.
Perhaps just to add to that, it might as well be important to mention that we were able to identify also a need to collect data specifically on this matter. Unfortunately, crime rates in most of the member states are not disaggregated and are not specifically disaggregated by nationality. So it is very hard to obtain, let's say, hard data on this. And we were only able to collect narrative and anecdotal information regarding what are the main concerns related to security and free movement, but there is very little data to kind of draft data-driven conclusions on this matter.
Colleagues, in terms of the last question, even though I'm not familiar with the conclusions of the meeting, our health ministers met I think 2 weeks ago in Guyana. It was an emergency meeting of health ministers, and they were discussing the coronavirus and our response as a region to deal with it. And out of that meeting, specific instructions were sent to the different member states, as well as how we deal with the big sea cruises coming into our borders. So attention is being given to the issue. And our health ministers would have discussed it about, I think, 2 weeks, maybe a week and a half ago in Georgetown.
And just to add to what Wanya just pointed out, it was only, I believe, Tuesday, we had a meeting of the Chiefs of Immigration and Control of Customs, and the Executive Director of CAFA was able to provide a succinct update to the immigration chiefs and the Control of Customs that would be critical for their own responses as well. So there's a lot of collaboration going on, led by the CARICOM entities, to ensure that we are in a position to effectively address the possibility of the coronavirus and its impact on our societies. Thank you.
Sense. Okay, great. And I just want to, I believe, well, this is Brendan. One of the benefits, of course, of CARICOM and its regional integration is that there are, more agencies than just that deal with more than just free movement. And I believe CARFA, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, our CARICOM Public Health Agency is responding and coordinating a regional response and providing guidance for all countries. While each country does ultimately have authority to enforce its own immigration, there is an effort to try to harmonize the response as far as quarantining particular countries or admitting cruise ships and things like that. So I believe there is some harmonization efforts going on at this time. Are there any other questions? I see. Yes. I see a question from a Lance. It says, how feasible is the utilization of data collected by high school students completing SBA requirements for CXCO levels in OECS efforts to improve data collection? Specifically, can schools or education management officials be trained to procure raw data as part of the SBA? Where did that go? Part of the SBA completion, which in turn be analyzed at the OECS level to give a clearer, more current view of integration and free movement efforts. Clarence, would you be able to comment on that?
All right. Thank you, Brendan. Yeah, I saw the comment and give some thought to it. I think once we are in a position to structure the SBA, those projects, maybe through way of perhaps sketching particular topics and areas where students can examine and perhaps even give some guidance in terms of data collection as well, because of course the concern would be the accuracy and usefulness of the data that's collected by the students. I mean, research is a skill, and it could be a learned skill. So I think it is one possibility that we can look at. But I also see an additional advantage there in terms of public awareness, because if you have students doing research at the level of CXC on regional integration arrangements, be it OECS, CARICOM, this enhances their own understanding of what those regimes are expected to do for them, and it creates what could be a support from a generation of young people for those regimes, because that I think is also critical for ensuring the survival and complete implementation of those regimes. So I think that the point is noted, and there could be good usefulness in it once we're able to manage such approach effectively. Back to you, Brendan.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the clarification and perspective. And I think we're going to take one more question, because I think this is an important question from Maxine Elaine. There is, I think, this will be the last question, a common feeling among nationals of receiving countries that intra-regional migrants are taking away jobs. In light of this, in the development of communications materials, we may need to consider who are defined as, quote unquote, the beneficiaries. Information, communication, education should possibly consider the benefits from the perspective of the traveler as well as the host. Any comments on this one?
Hi, this is Briana. This is a perception that came up often in our interviews, and people often said that they had anticipated that this would be a problem, but in most countries had not actually experienced this as a problem once the implementation began of the agreements. You know, given limited data, it's hard to measure the real impact, as Estela mentioned, but many participants talked about kind of the reality being different than the expectation prior to implementation.
And perhaps to add to that, although we don't have specific numbers regarding people actually engaging in the labor market, particularly, as I said previously, in the informal sector of the market, we do have numbers on verifications of skill certificates, issuance of skill certificates and verification, as well as on facilitation of movement. And numbers, then again, are relatively small. So numbers are increasing each year, and we have seen a growing trend. However, numbers are still, I would say, much smaller than what people would think. So then again, I encourage you all to go to the report, look at the numbers, and I think that you will find that they are much smaller than at least what we expected from the beginning. So that can also be seen as an indication of people not necessarily utilizing the provisions within the regimes to migrate for looking for better job opportunities. We saw this in most of the countries. The only countries that I would say perhaps may have a different situation, as they are actually receiving much more people with skill certificates than the ones they are sending. So perhaps to explain a little better, we were able to compare the number of skill certificates that were being issued in each country with the number of skill certificates that were being verified. And the two countries where we could see a big difference in these two numbers were Antigua and Barbuda and Guyana. So perhaps where the impact may be a little bit less proportionate is in these two countries.
Thank you. Can I just add? I think the last question that I have here on my screen, basically helps us with our push to ensure that we do better with data collection and data analysis, because that is really when you get the full story. And I think it is also relevant to, even though somebody may be traveling under the facilitation of travel, most likely the person is moving into the other member state as a consumer of services, which means that that person is bringing benefits and is contributing to the economy. For instance, we have a number of festivals in the community. There are music festivals, there's carnivals, and there's a lot of intra-regional travel happening around those times. So it means that a person is traveling under the facilitation of travel, which has not been identified as an economic regime per se, but this person is a consumer who is going to consume in that particular member state. So I think the recommendation or the consideration that is put to us here is useful. And I think we also need to look into ensuring that when we see persons moving in, that a bulk of them is coming in to contribute to consumer service. And I think it is important in our communication tools to speak to that as well.
Yeah, if I may add to this discussion, Brendan, I think there is an opportunity created from, and bear in mind that we share member states as it pertains to the Union. Guyana has the prospect of being the. I'm breaking up? Are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you now.
You hearing me now? Oh, okay, okay, thanks. Yeah, Guyana has the capacity, because of newfound wealth and resources, to be the fastest growing economy in the world for the foreseeable future. This means that Guyana would more likely present greater demands for workers. Workers who can now take advantage of that opportunity throughout the CSME space to work in Guyana and to contribute to the economic transformation of this economy and society and to their own advancement. But we have to be mindful of that, and we will need to do some research in this regard to ensure that that this opportunity is optimized for not just Guyana, but for the whole Caribbean community. And there is also the possibility for, because of the fact that we share member states with the CSME, for the OECS Economic Union. So I'm putting that out. I'm not sure if there have been discussion in that regard. but I think the research is critical there as well, so that we know where to focus on as this process carries through, and so that everybody within the CARICOM framework can benefit.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for your comments. I'd like to also mention as we close that these types of research projects, and also the research that I mentioned at the beginning on the needs assessments, these are all part of helping both IOM and the countries share and spread information regarding migration in the region. This future research opportunity, these research opportunities and future research really helps IOM and countries understand the gaps and needs that are presented, and gives us evidence-based, gives us evidence to look for future projects to implement in the region. And the cooperation of the states and the cooperation of other agencies like CARICOM and OECS are really critical to helping advance migration governance and sound migration policy in the region. So I'd like to thank CARICOM and OECS for their cooperation, and all of the government representatives from states and territories in the region that have joined this call. We really do appreciate this engagement and hope that you find it just as beneficial as we do, as these are all learning experiences for the United Nations agencies as well as the states. So we really appreciate these relationships and partnerships and cooperation. And I would just like to mention that there is future research coming, including research on labor markets in Guyana. There is some future research happening on planned relocation in the Caribbean, including on how free movement might affect that as well. So I want to again thank everybody and encourage you to read the report. And of course, if you have any questions at all about the Caribbean migration consultations, IOM's work in the region, or anything specific about this report, you can email cmc@iom.int. My email address, btarne@iom.int. Or specifically on this report, would be best to email Estela Aragón, which is Aragon, Aragon, @iom.int. And if you have any questions or comments, we're happy to receive it, and we look forward to future engagements in the future. But thank you again, and have a wonderful day.